Welcome to Central Synagogue. My name is Marina. I am the program manager for adult programs here. And I'm really excited that you are all interested in Jewish magic just like I am. Over the summer, I was brainstorming with my supervisor, Rabbi Sarah Berman, and I told her that, I've been consuming magic and supernatural things since I was a child, but they're always in from a Christian perspective, a pop culture perspective, and I never really was able to connect to magic through my own culture, my own Jewish culture. And so I asked her, could we do a whole year on magic at Central Synagogue? She said, let's do one program and see how it goes. So she connected me to Rabbi Rachael Pass. Rachel is a freelance rabbi here in New York, and she also has an interest in magic, in feminist theory and feminist thought in Judaism. But I'm going to let her introduce herself and get us started with our discussion on Jewish magic. So again, thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over. And again, we're going to pass the mic around when you guys talk.
Thanks. Did it work? Now? Hello, 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 hello. No? Shabbat Shalom. There we go. Great. That's the first thing that worked. I'm so glad. Hello, I'm Rabbi Rachael. I'm a freelance rabbi in Brooklyn. Not to say that I don't come to Manhattan. Obviously, I do, but that's where I live. And we're going to be looking at two different folkloric figures, the figure of the golem and the figures, plural, of ghosts in our tradition tonight. A few things before we actually dive into our texts about how I like to run a classroom. The first thing is that this comes actually out of Lutheran teaching, but it's so Jewish that I decided we share it, which is that no one of us in the room ever knows more than all of us in the room. And what that means is that I really, really value, expect, would love participation, and bring what you know about these topics or what you know about being a person in this world to these topics. And that's why we have the other mic that's going to be floating around. I'm going to have you read along. We're going to interpret. And the other sort of rule of my classroom, or the other thing that I'm going to ask of you, is that you come in with an open mind. And especially when we're looking at something like magic or folklore figures, that this is not necessarily rooted in fact as we might understand, but is myth and folklore. And so keep your mind open, learn something weird, and decide whether you believe in it later. So we're going to start with, did you like that? Decide later. So we're going to start with the golem. And originally, and I will say that my interests lie more in rituals. And so originally what I wanted us to do was do some rituals around graveyards and some of the weird folklore rituals that we have. It didn't quite feel appropriate given the world that we're living in right now to look at rituals that involve dancing on graves. So we moved a bit more towards the golem, and we're going to start with the golem, who feels very appropriate as a figure to be looking at given the world that we're in at the moment. So before we actually dive into the text, who here has encountered the concept of a golem before? Okay, nearly everybody. I'm going to ask anybody who had a hand up, what do you know of the golem before we dive into different versions of the story?
Oh, hi everyone.
Hi.
Yeah, I mean, I think the version I read about, saw in, pop culture, media, etc., is, a couple of things in common. One is protector of the Jewish people. I think two is you've got to create the golem, and there's a specific way of doing it. And the third thing is to, I guess, uncreate it. I think there's a little scroll that you can remove or erase the name, etc. So that's
you've really encountered the golem if you've gotten to the idea of the scroll
in popular culture
Yeah.
and just some stuff I read over the years.
So the basic elements
Thank you.
completely nailed. Here, I'll take the mic. The basic elements you've completely nailed, which are it's a created figure that is a protector of the Jewish people. And that last bit is important. And then there's like some way that you make it and some way that you unmake it. I saw other hands. Was there anything more to add? Yeah.
We took a golem tour in Prague.
Oh,
You know,
so
and-
you're experts on the
Well, not at
golem.
all, because this is a few years ago, but there were 7 very old temples that
Mhm.
this tour took us around. And the golem was created to protect the Jews in Prague when there was another pogrom that was going on there, because the Jews were using Gentile baby blood for matzah or whatever the
Allegedly.
yeah.
So the most famous figure or the most famous story of the golem that we have comes out of Prague, is the Golem of Prague. There are other stories of the golem, but we are going to be looking primarily at the Golem of Prague because he's the most famous and we like our celebrities here. And I actually think even one of our texts comes out of the golem tour. If I'm remembering correctly, it was a while ago that I put together our texts. Okay, anything else about the golem that we already know are coming in with before we dive in?
It's a bit tangential, but I'm an artist. It's prehistoric times, dolls of various kinds, so man-made humanoids have been part of culture as religious objects, companions, etc. And they serve to like develop people's personalities. So before Barbie, there were baby dolls. Now there's Barbie, and Barbie can do anything she wants as long as she changes clothes. But it's a doll. It's a doll. So I'm interested in it from that perspective also, that it's something outside of the human race that is like accomplishing something that you wanted to do, that you want done.
So if you decide you like me as a teacher and you want to bring me back, another topic that I do is goddess figures in Judaism, particularly biblical goddess figures. And there are some doll-like elements to that. Okay. So we're going to start with 2 slightly different versions of the story of the golem. The first is a version written up quite nicely for us in the Atlanta Jewish Times. And the second one was from culturetrip.com or .org. And the fun thing about doing folklore is that you don't get folklore from like academic articles, right? You get folklore from voices of the people, and the stories are never quite the same each time you tell it. So does somebody want to be a reader for us to read the Golem of Prague from our first source? Darielle, was that? Yeah, thank you. Darielle and I learn together all the time, so thank you.
The story of the Golem is one of the most famous stories of Jewish history. Tradition recounts that when persecutors rose up to attack us, the Maharal Yehuda Loev, chief rabbi of Prague 500 years ago, created the Golem, a man-like figure made from the dust of the earth, endowed with life by means of a secret Kabbalistic formula. Through the Golem, the Maharal brought about miracles for the protection of the Jews.
Really quick, I'm going to interrupt you, which you're very used to. Can we hear me? So the Maharal is like Moreh Harav, so our teacher and our Rabbi Yehuda Lo, or Loev, or Lov, or Loeb, depending on which way you're going to pronounce it. And he not only is the famous creator of the Golem of Prague, but he is also quite a famous commentator. And so if you're ever on Svaria.org and you're reading a text from Torah and you're looking at the commentators, you might find the Maharal there. And so far, everything we have here is going to be like an element to every version of the story of the Golem that we get. So made from the dust of the earth, endowed with life by this like secret Kabbalistic formula. And the Maharal brought about miracles for the protection of the Jews. All right, let's keep going.
A famous story about the Golem deals with blood libels. Back then, Christian priests, especially the priest Thaddeus, claimed that Jews secretly killed Christian children and used their blood for their Passover matzot. After Thaddeus' sermons, the Christian townspeople would pour out of church, seething with hatred for the Jews. The Maharal, in desperation to save the Jews from slaughter, prayed for guidance. He received an answer at night in a vision. He was given 10 Hebrew letters, signifying words meaning, "You will create a golem, a thing of clay, and destroy the wicked." The Maharal and 2 friends went to the Moldova River and began to shape the soft clay. They created a figure that resembled a man. The first friend circled the golem 7 times while reciting certain holy letter combinations. The golem began to glow. The second friend did the same thing, and the glow was replaced by a watery vapor. Then the Maharal also circled the golem 7 times, and the 3 of them cried out, and God blew the breath of life into his nostrils. The golem's eyes then opened. The men discovered that the golem had great strength and also the ability to disappear. The Maharal told the golem, "We created you with God's help to protect the Jews against our enemies. You must obey my orders in everything." The golem could see and hear, but was mute. He nodded his head in agreement. The golem was not a monster, but rather a gentle soul that had no independent thought but was morally upright. He did exactly what he was told until he was told to stop by the Maharal. When asked to bring water to the kitchen, he continued to bring water until the kitchen flooded and was then told to stop. When he was told to catch fish, he fished all day, and when told that there were too many fish, he dumped the entire basket of them back into the lake.
So this element of the golem story is going to become important because it's going to appear in a different way in our next story. So far, right, we've got the need for the golem is the accusations of blood libels. Then we've got a version of how the golem is created with these 7 circles and these 10 Hebrew letters that sort of like appeared. And then we have this golem who is not a monster, is a gentle soul, but goes a little too far in the tasks that the golem is given and then has to be stopped. Okay. Will you read the last one? Thanks.
Most important, the golem performed many acts of brute strength to defend the Jews. After many other incidents involving the golem, and once the blood libel battle was over, the Maharal no longer relied on the golem. With his 2 friends, they followed the same process used to create the golem, but in reverse. They wrapped the golem in a talit and hid him in the attic of the Maharal's synagogue, available to return when needed. No one was told where the golem had gone. Only a few in Prague knew the truth, and today many believe that the secret incantation to bring him back could only be enacted by the Maharal.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for reading. So I sort of outlined the elements that we have of the story so far. Is there anything that's like coming up as surprising, interesting, weird? We like it. We don't like it. Any reactions? Yeah. Will you take the mic from?
That the golem wasn't a monster. In my mind, it's kind of created like Frankenstein.
Yeah.
They call it the Frankenstein monster, but again, he was brainless. He didn't do anything unless he was told or got upset.
So Frankenstein is actually an excellent comparison to the golem, I think. Here, I'll come take that from you. Because it's another folkloric figure created by somebody to do a job and then sort of gets out of hand. So we might even call Frankenstein a golem. But I like
Shelley. I wonder if Mary Shelley was thinking about this Jewish folklore when she wrote the story. I'm sure everybody.
I have no idea.
Really? Because, before all the movies,
Yeah.
Mary Shelley, who was incidentally the wife of Percy Bysshe Shelley, the poet, was at a retreat with some other artist and writer friends, and they had a contest to write like a ghost story.
And that's how
And
Frankenstein
that's
came to
her,
be.
and that was her ghost story. And there's argumentation about whether her husband helped refine it and all of that. But
Patriarchy.
she's the originator of the story of Frankenstein. It's very,
Yeah,
the
so
book
I
is
wonder-
excellent but very different from the movies. I encourage everybody to, it's a very quick read too.
Thanks. Yeah, I do wonder if she was thinking of it. Yeah, Marina.
A couple things came up for me in the text that felt like a little symbolic and referential to other Jewish stories and traditions. So like on the first page, the Maharal and two friends. So it's three people, a person and like maybe like two witnesses.
Oh, I like
and
that. Wait, I'm going to stop you already. The idea of a person and two witnesses, right? Anything that's sort of done in a Jewish legal context is requiring two witnesses, right? Like a wedding requires two witnesses. Capital trial requires two witnesses. And so that I'm going to slow down and just like give a little more weight to that piece.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And you mentioned the wedding, and so they talked about the like circled the golem 7 times, and you know
Another thing we see in weddings.
exactly.
Which
So
is actually an Ashkenazi folk tradition. So comes out of the same world of the 7 circles.
And then the last thing, so like those were like the wedding connections that I was seeing, which I thought was interesting. And then just the quote that God blew the breath of life into his nostrils, like that comes straight from Genesis and Adam. And so they were doing this very godly thing.
Yeah. Right. And in some ways they're mimicking God, but right, they're creating a living question mark on the word living being here. And so using that language in God and blew the breath of life into his nostrils is very intentional, is sort of hearkening back to Adam as the original golem, which we will see a little later when we get to the text. All right. Anything else from the first version of the story? Yeah, Dariel.
This may be splitting hairs.
Go for it.
But on the second page, he was a gentle soul that had no independent thought, but was morally upright. I asked the question, can you be morally upright without independent thought?
That is an amazing question. And I don't know. I mean, to be morally upright, is it to do the right things or is it to make the right decisions, right? Like, are you morally upright if somebody else is telling you all the time, this is how many fish to catch, or this is how many fish to stop catching?
Right. Like, are you holding your own morality there or not? It's an interesting thing.
So I think that's actually going to be a really excellent piece to hold on to, that morally upright version of this story, because in the next one, we see that the element of getting out of hand, getting a little more out of hand. Is somebody interested in reading our second version of the story to us? Brilliant. Thank you.
The mysterious tale of the golem takes place in the dim tangle of lanes that once made up the now defunct Jewish quarter, today's gentrified Joseph Fov, essentially part of the old town. The tale goes that in the 16th century, the renowned Rabbi Loew, also known as the Maharal of Prague, was seeking a way to protect the local Jewish people from pogroms and from the whim of unpredictable rulers up at Prague Castle. Endowed with the power to transform the 4 elements into living things, he molded a superhuman from the mud of the Vatava, the golem. To bring the golem to life, Rabbi Loew had to insert a shem, a clay tablet bearing the name of God, into its mouth. The amorphous clay beast is usually depicted around 8 feet, 2.4 meters high, with illuminated eyes and a thick belt around his considerable waist. Although this image originates from a 20th century film called The Golem. Previous depictions show the creature slightly thinner and more human-like, but always tall and muscular. His task was, after all, to protect the Jewish people of Prague. With that in mind, it may come as a surprise to find that the word golem in Yiddish means stupid or lethargic, although the Hebrew meaning was originally closer to shapeless mass. Rabbi Lowe would deactivate his creation for the Sabbath to allow the creature to rest according to the Jewish custom. However, one day he forgot, and the golem went raging through the ghetto, destroying everything in its path. Rabbi Lowe was reciting Psalm 92 in the old new synagogue when he was interrupted and told of the chaos the golem was causing. He eventually confronted the monster outside the synagogue, where he managed to remove the Shem. The golem was never revived and allegedly was later stored in the synagogue's attic, which remained locked for centuries. To this day, Psalm 92 is recited twice during services in Prague's most famous synagogue.
Brilliant. Thank you. So what are our main differences in these two in the second version of the story? There are quite a few differences, of course. It's folklore.
Sorry. The bit of the Shem is like a little battery pack to
Ooh, interesting.
to make the creature come to life. I find that very interesting and very stimulating story-wise, especially since it's from Jewish text.
Yeah, so the idea of the Shem, of the name of God, or one of the many names of God, being the thing that activates the golem, is found in more versions of the story than not. And so there are versions where it's on a scroll, there are versions where it's on this tablet, and there are some versions where the word is drawn directly into the golem's head. And you'll see, actually, if you flip a few pages ahead, I've got some images of golems here for us. So we have this figurine here, which seems to have a hole in their chest for the insertion of a tablet or of a scroll to put the Shem. Our second image is of Rabbi Lowe and sort of the more human-like figure with the Shem on his forehead, and the Shem there seems to be, it's either a Vav or a Gimel Lamed Mem. I'm assuming it's a Gimel for golem, golem. And then our third one is a more modern take, which is a hat that one can wear. But I brought this one as an example of another version of the word that can be used, not being a name of God, although it kind of is a name of God, but being the word emet, aleph mem tav, which aleph mem tav, which means truth. And that to deactivate, the legend goes, is that you erase the aleph, so you're left with the word met, which means dead. And so in life, it is emet, it is truth, and in deactivation, it is met, it is dead. All right, what are other differences from our second version of the story? Yeah, I have the mic.
In the first version, version, you have where the golem is only doing so much as it's told, where you tell it to fish and it fish, and you don't tell it to stop, then it won't stop.
Amelia Bedelia S.
Whereas in the second tale, when Rabbi Lau didn't deactivate it for Shabbos, it started, I don't know if I could say of its own will, but it maybe malfunctioned and started, raging through the city.
So I think this is where we get the question of morally upright or not, right? Like, does it have will here or not? Is that the golem is supposed to be deactivated for Shabbat, as in the golem is meant to keep Shabbat, ? And so when the golem doesn't obey Jewish law that is for Jewish humans, it runs rampant and causes massive destruction, either to the ghetto itself or in some versions to the whole town of Prague or the whole city of Prague. And so we get here now suddenly, like, what happens when the protection gets out of hand? What happens when we don't know if there's a moral conscience or not to this protector being? I'm like, is it willfully destroying, or is it just protecting through the town and destroying everything in its path by doing so? Not to shift us at all to talking about modern politics, but it does seem a little relevant to have this protector force that might be getting out of hand. And so there's the golem in a different light. What else is different about our second story? There are smaller differences, right? There's the Vltava River versus the Moldova River. Yeah.
And instead of there being 3 people who make the golem activated, who animate the golem, there's only the rabbi.
Yeah. So here we've lost our witnesses, and our version of the story, I'll come get the mic in a second. And our version of the creation is quite different this time. Like not only do we have the Shem, but we don't quite have the circles. We don't quite, oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. We don't really have so much at all for the creation. Will you pass? Thanks. Nobody on the live stream can hear you unless you say
Sorry, you're
something.
missing the Kabbalistic elements that
Yeah.
dominated the first story.
So we don't really have Kabbalah in this version at all. But we do have Psalm 92 in this version, which Psalm 92. So I don't know if you've heard of this practice before or not, but there is a practice in more traditional Judaism, but not exclusive to traditional Judaism, of reciting Psalms in times of distress. And so there are different Psalms for different moments of distress. My favorite, I always forget what number Psalm it is, but there's a Psalm that has 9 verses. And so you're meant to say it during childbirth, 1 verse for the 9 months of pregnancy. Another one that you might recognize is, I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come? My help comes from God. Psalm 121 is another one that we say during times of distress. Psalm 92 is a very interesting one because Psalm 92 is said as a protection spell almost. And so the fact that it's citing like he just happened to be in the old New Shul reciting Psalm 92 for like no reason. He was just saying this protection spell while he had forgotten to put the golem to sleep. And then now in the Prague Shul, apparently they say Psalm 92 twice every Shabbat. It feels like that's almost like giving us like an origin story of why do they say this psalm. But that piece is like very different from what we had. It's like almost a liturgy of the golem, bless you, as opposed to like a secret Kabbalistic ritual that had a lot of physical choreography to it.
Might it actually be said that perhaps the reason they do it twice a day is simply because the golem is at rest? And it's a
So
way
they
of
need double
invoking
protection.
that protection?
Yeah, very much could be. And so the question then becomes like, did that practice come after the fall of the golem or after putting the golem to rest, or was it already there? And so the golem story became a way to explain the liturgy, right? There's like the circle question that we don't know. Oh, I don't want to put the mics too close. Okay. So then the next thing that we're going to look at, unless we have more thoughts on this golem so far. So the next thing that we're going to look at are different versions of how to make a golem. And we have here from Practical Kabbalah from UMass Boston, a very clear like set of steps and procedures that come into making a golem. I'm realizing though that there was one more thing that I wanted to say about the first 2 that I forgot to say, which is that each of our stories has a version of using Hebrew letters in a specific way, right? I showed you the Emet and the Met, or we talked about the Shem, but we didn't quite highlight in the first version of the story that it's the 3rd paragraph on the first page, that in the first version of the story, the way that the Maharal comes to decide to create this golem is that he has a dream. And there's a whole folklore of dreams that we could get into for when we finally do our year course for Marina. But the idea of something coming to a rabbi in a dream is meant to have like a little bit of like, is God giving this to him in this dream? Like probably. And so there's like that like little bit of element there. And he has this dream. And in this dream, he's given 10 Hebrew letters in a row, which he then comes to understand, and it's unclear if this is happening in the dream or if this is his interpretation of the dream when he wakes up, but he takes those 10 letters and he turns it into the acronym for the sentence, "You will create a golem, a thing of clay, and destroy the wicked." And so in the dream, God or a messenger of God is giving the Maharal these Hebrew letters that sort of are almost like a prophecy or like a portent for the future of what's to come. And then in the second version of the story, we're taking different names of God in order to give life to something else. And that piece, and this is the last thing I'll say before we actually get to learn how to make our own golems, and then you can all go onto the streets of Manhattan and make your own golems, is that we have this concept that, and it's a Kabbalistic concept, that there are 72 different names of God. And those 72 different names include like Adonai, El, Elohim, Hashem, are sort of standard ones that we use pretty regularly. Like Shekhinah is another one there. But there are also names of God that are a mix of letters that don't have like any literal meaning to them. So if you've ever seen Madonna's tattoo, for instance, that is one of the names of God. I think hers is like a Lamed Vav something. It is like a name of God. It has no literal meaning to it, but it has like a Kabbalistic like form of, I think hers is about love because it's Madonna. But that there are like different, you like mix the letters together, you get these things. It's a very odd, I won't lie. But it's those names get used for the golem also. And so that is another thing that's sort of happening here, is that we have this thing to do with Hebrew letters. As we sort of know, I'm going to assume that we've all heard the first chapter of Genesis when God speaks the world into being, right? Let there be light, and then ta-da, light. That God does so in the Hebrew language. And so the letters and the tradition that sort of gets pulled out of that is that the literal letters and the literal words that can come out of our mouths or that we can write down can have enough sanctity to create life or to endow a golem with 75% of life, right? If we're deciding that the golem doesn't have that moral capacity, unclear if the golem does or not. Okay, so that's the last thing that I wanted to make sure we highlighted from the first two versions of the story. Now we're going to get into how do we create a golem. I'm going to read for us our list, and then I think, well, we'll see how we'll see how we feel. Okay, how to make a golem. I just think, like, I don't know. I love the idea of a rabbi standing up here and teaching you all how to create a golem. Please don't let your golems get out of hand. Although there are many variants in procedures recorded, there seem to be a number of elements and steps in common to most methods of creating a golem. They are: 1, the ritual cleansing and high qualifications of those creating the golem. So maybe go to the mikveh beforehand, do the Jewish ritual bath, get yourself really spiritually ready to create your golem. 2, the use of some form of soil, sometimes clay or dust, to form the body of a golem, particularly soil which has never been plowed or used in any way. That's going to be harder to find in Manhattan. The use of verbal ritual to form the soil into a human form. A concluding word or name here capitalized because it's name of God, is used to activate the creature. To activate the creature. Medieval techniques of creating a golem often revolved around a highly complex procedure, which required the mystics to recite, presumably from memory and probably while in a state of meditation, an array of Hebrew alphabet letter combinations and or various permutations of one or more names of God. So these are our basic elements. There were 4 of them, I believe. I already forgot because I turned the page over. There were 4 of them. And what I think I'm going to have us do now, if you are willing to do so, is that we have a few more texts here that are going to give us different versions of how to create the golem, or are going to be templates that other people then used to come up with how to create the golem. So the first one we have is it's from Moshe Idel, but he's citing Sefer Yetzirah, which is a mystical text from a long time ago. I actually don't remember what century, but it's medieval. Sorry about that. So that's our first text, and you're going to see it's got a lot to do with letters. Our second text is from Sanhedrin, is from the Talmud. So that's somewhere between the 6th to 8th century. And our third text is from Genesis Rabbah, which is a midrash, is like a rabbinic commentary sort of, or storytelling version of the book of Genesis. Also going to be like roughly 6th century, 2nd to 6th, somewhere in there. And these three texts in a row are going to have elements are all going to contain in some way those four elements. Here's what I think we're going to do. I think I'm going to divide us up roughly into 3 groups, and I'm going to have you in your groups. You know what? Actually, that doesn't feel fair to the people on the live stream. Okay, so just kidding. We're going to read them together, and we're going to see what elements we can pull. Great. Okay. I need somebody who is willing to read the text from Sefer Yetzirah from Moshe Idel. Moshe Idel, also brilliant scholar, and wrote a whole book on the Golem. So if you want to read more, he's a great person to go to. I need somebody, though, who's willing to be just a little funky, because this text is going to have just like a little weirdness to it. Who's willing to read this text? Yeah. Okay.
This one? Okay.
You can read our next one.
I don't know if I can be funky, but I'll do my best. I'll do my best. Whoever studies Sefer Yetzirah has to purify himself, don white robes. It is forbidden to study alone, but only in 2s and 3s, as it is written. And the beings they made in Haran, Genesis 12:5, and as it is written, 2 are better than 1, Ecclesiastes 4:9.
Okay, so I'm going to interrupt you already. Sorry that you haven't gotten to the funky part yet, but I'm just going to give a little clarification about what's happening here. So whosoever studies Sefer Yetzirah, this book that's going to tell us what to do, has to purify themselves. So they have to go to the mikveh, they have to dunk in the ritual bath, and they have to wear white robes. And they're not allowed to study this text on their own. You cannot study the creation of Golem on your own, presumably because it's quite dangerous. And so then we're given 2 texts from Torah, from Tanakh, from the Jewish Bible, which are sort of like citations. So the beings they made in Haran is going to be about beings that were made in Haran. So maybe a question mark, a golem figure, question mark. And the second one, 2 are better than 1, because it is better to have 2 people studying something dangerous than it is to study something dangerous alone. All right, you can keep reading. Thank you.
It is required that he take virgin soil from a place in the mountain where none has plowed. Then he shall knead the soil with living water, and shall make a body and begin to permutate the alphabet of 221 gates, each limb separately, each limb with a corresponding letter mentioned in Sefer Yetzirah. And the alphabets shall be permutated first. Then afterward he shall permutate with the vowel aleph, bet, gimel, dalet, and always the letter of the divine name with them, and all the alphabet. Afterward, all the letters with each of the vowels, as with the aleph, a, I, e, o. I'm not going to pronounce this correctly.
You're doing a great job.
All right.
This is the first part.
Then
I, E, O,
and
then
then Afterward, the permutation of aleph with a letter from the divine name plus the vowels, aleph yud, and similarly in its entirety. Afterward, he shall appoint bet, and likewise gimel, and each limb with the letter designated to it. He shall do this when he is pure. There are 221 gates.
Brilliant. Thank you. So 221 gates definitely means something. Unclear what. He definitely had meaning to it when he wrote it. So what this is giving us is very in-depth, and I think you did a great job with the vowels, a very in-depth look at the way that the golem is created and the letters that are used, or the words, or how they're done. So although it was kind of hard to follow because medieval, you're meant to knead the soil with living water, so water that is of the legal status of being able to be used for a mikveh, for a ritual bath. So this is a sort of version of water that is sanctified or holy, and you knead it like challah dough. And I think the use of the word knead there is really intentional. And then you create each limb, and each limb gets a letter that's listed in Sefer Yetzirah somewhere. So each, A, B, C, D, E, it's a different version of head, shoulders, knees, and toes. And then what you do as you're creating is that you're reciting this weird meditation thing, sort of getting yourself worked up in a trance, where you do the different vowels per letter. So like you're kneading the arm, for example, and you're going to go I, E, O, E, and then you're going to go ba, bi, bo, be, and then you're going to go ga, gai, gi, go, get, and you keep going through the alphabet. It's very strange. Why might this be the type of ritual that's being used? Like, why might we be doing all of this? Thanks.
It brings up for me the idea of like Hashem creating life from language. And so like in order for us to do that, we need to go through all of the possible sounds in language.
Every permutation of every sound that we could come up with
to create that life.
I like it. Did you say like coding? Yeah, there you go. I know nothing about coding, but coding a golem. Yeah.
I was going to say something even more simplistic, which is, to your point earlier, you want to discourage people from, creating as many golems and having them run around. So you just make
so you don't want to be sitting there going, ga, ga, ga,
you just want to make it as burdensome as possible. So yeah.
So it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work to do it. I like that. I also think there's something to the idea of like an incantation working you into a sort of trance, that there's like some form of your meditation. Yeah. You're like you're entering this very spiritual space while you're doing the godlike work of creation. And I think that's another sort of like element in the background of this like weird, and there were medieval meditative practices, which involved sitting there and really meditating on a sound and just going ga, guy over and over again until you got there. So it's sort of like implanting, that's not the right word I'm looking for, sort of like layering that meditation practice onto supplanting, is that the word I was looking for? We're never going to find out. Onto this type of creation. Okay. Thank you for reading the weird text. I really appreciate you being willing to go there. Our next text is from the Babylonian Talmud. And a quick note about the translation that we have here. It's from Sanhedrin 38b. And on Sefaria, the site that I used to make the source sheet, it's probably, if you've ever been in the last 5 years to a Jewish text study, you've seen a source sheet that looks something like this. On Sefaria, the way that they translate the Talmud to make it easier to understand is that they fill in some of the linguistic blanks that are left in the Talmud. The Talmud is an extremely concise text. So it would be like saying a sentence. Instead of saying a sentence, I would say sentence, and you would need to fill in all of the other things. So what's in bold is an exact translation of the text. And what is not in bold is somebody filling it in to make the sentences more accessible to us. But also what it means is that you sometimes get the translator's bias. So there are some things that are going to be biases. Are you still willing to read for us a text? Brilliant. Thank you. Rabbi Yochanan Bar Chanina.
Rabbi Yohanan Bar Hanina says daytime is 12 hours long, and the day Adam, the first man, was created was divided as follows. In the first hour of the day, his dust was gathered. In the second, an undefined figure was fashioned. In the third, his limbs were extended. In the fourth, a soul was cast into him. In the fifth, he stood on his legs. In the sixth, he called the creatures by the names he gave them. In the seventh, Eve was paired with him. In the eighth, they rose to the bed 2 and descended 4. For example, Cain and Abel were immediately born. In the ninth, he was commanded not to eat of the tree of knowledge. In the 10th, he sinned. In the 11th, he was judged. In the 12th, he was expelled and left the Garden of Eden. As it is stated, but man abides not in honor. He is like the beasts that perish, Psalm 49:13. Adam did not abide, for example, sleep, in place of honor for even one night.
Brilliant. Thank you. So
It was
here,
very quick.
it was very quick. And I will say, they say it's 12 hours long, but it's also a day. So it might be actually every hour is 2 hours. But either way, you know, by 6 o'clock or by noon, he was out there naming everything. And then only a couple hours later, he's got 2 kids. It's a busy day. And then by the end of it, it's kicked out. So what does this have anything to do with a golem?
We created Adam.
Yeah. So this is how God creates Adam. And so it's a template for how then we create golems, right? We start with gathering dust, gathering the soil. And the second, we put together sort of a figure. And then you extend the limbs. So in this version, you do the limbs after, I guess, the torso, the trunk. In our version before, it was piece by piece, we're all created. It doesn't give us the order, but you sort of do all pieces and then adjoin them. And then a soul gets cast into them. And then he gets up and he does his business. And so this is where we get the template. I will also say that in the Aramaic, well, actually it's Hebrew and it's Hebrew here. In that second hour, when it says a figure was fashioned, in the Hebrew, what it says is naaseh, we will make, or we made, golem. So that figure that was fashioned is literally a golem is fashioned. And so then the question becomes, how does Adam turn into Adam, whereas our golems turn into these, like, you know, waddly, unmorally upright, not morally upright creatures. I guess the difference is that we're not quite God. All right, we're going to read one more on creation of golems, and then we're going to move. Oh, actually, not quite move. All right. Our last text is from the Midrash, and this is going to be another version of sort of like a template for creating the golem. Somebody willing to read? Yeah. Thank you.
Bereshit Rabbah. Another matter, this is the book of the descendants of Adam.
Okay, wait, I'm going to stop you already because so what the Midrash is doing here structurally is that it's starting with Toldot, which is we're actually in a different Toldot this week in the Torah portion, which would have been nice if we were in the same one, but it's not. With the Torah portion or the chunk of Torah where they're talking about the descendants of Adams. So it's going to start there. It's going to give us a whole story, and then it's going to come back somewhere else. But what this is meant to be sort of as if we're reading the Torah first time through, we haven't even gotten past Adam yet. All we've gotten is Adam and Eve expelled from the garden, and now they're having children, and those children are going to start having children. So that's where we are in the Torah, and we don't have anything else yet. Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
It is written, Your eyes saw my unformed parts, and in your book they were all written. Of the days that were created, each one is his. Psalms 139:16. Rabbi Yehoshua bar Nehemiah and Rabbi Yehoshua bar Shimon said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, when the Holy One, blessed be he, created Adam, the first man, he created him so large as to be filling the whole world. From east to west, from where is it derived? It is as it is stated, from back, achar, and front, kadem, you shaped me. Psalms 139:5. From north to south, from where is it derived? It is as it is stated, from the day God made Adam on the earth, and from one end of the heavens to the other end. Deuteronomy 4:32. From where is it derived that he even filmed the empty space of the world? It is as it is stated, you placed your palm upon me. Psalms 139:5. Rabbi Tanchuma in the name of Rabbi Benaiah and Rabbi Rachael in the name of Rabbi Elazar.
Thank you for being so brave with these names.
Said he created him unformed, and he was placed from the ends of the world to its end. That is what is written. Your eyes saw my unformed parts. Psalms 139:16. Rabbi Yehuda bar Shimon said, while Adam, the first man, was placed unformed before him who spoke, and the world came into being, he showed him each and every generation and its scholars, each and every generation and its wise men, each and every generation and its interpreters of the Torah, each and every generation and its leaders. As it is stated, your eyes saw my unformed parts, and in your book they were all written. The unformed ones, whom your eyes saw, they were already written in the book of Adam, the first man. That is, this is the book of the descendants of Adam.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. This text is also a pretty weird one, obviously. Here's what I'm going to point out from this text, and then I'm actually going to move us along. So clearly every citation except for the one from the spot in Genesis where it's commentating is from Psalm 139. And Psalm 139, if you flip over to the next page or to our next text, is where it's really the only place in the Torah where we get the word golem. And it's 139:16, which is also cited in our Breshit Rabbah text that we just looked at. Your eyes saw my unformed limbs. Your eyes saw golmi. They were all recorded in your book. In due time, they were formed to the very last one of them. And so here again, we have the word golem or golmi, my golem, being used as this like formed figure that is not yet to be human. And in our Breshit Rabbah text, we're given another version of how Adam gets created. And this one, Adam is so big in his original creation that he takes up the whole world. Why? Because in Psalm 139, we have this verse, from the back and the front, you shaped me. The back being all the way to the east and the front being all the way to the west. I might have gotten those backwards in order, but either way. And so here's another version of how can we create a golem is, do we create the back first and then the front second? How big is it? And can we use Psalm 139, or can we use this as another more difficult to access, but another form of like a blueprint for a golem? Okay. Any other thoughts on this text? I'm not going to go back bit by bit because there's a lot. I actually will say there is in the like sort of almost the exact middle from 139:5, you placed your palm upon me, I think is also another interesting element here of like having to create with the figure of like blessing, right? Like to put a hand on somebody, on someone's head or on someone's shoulder is a sort of a blessing element. And we've not quite seen the creation of the golem have a blessing level accompaniment, right? It's got incantations for sure. It's got words that go into it, but there isn't like a blessing element. And this feels to be a little bit of like a blessing element. Okay. Yeah, Marina.
Just wanted to bring attention to something that someone in the Facebook chat mentioned. I guess
thanks.
A connection to this text as well as to the other one, what makes Adam different than our golems. So Cheryl said that it's the intention. As you're needing, be it clay, food, or here a person or golem, you're to portray, pray, chant, and that energy goes into the form. And so that's how
so like the energy that is sort of created, especially I would say in the chanting and the incantations, gets like put in there. I love that. It's like an element of like giving of oneself in the birthing.
And I wonder if that also goes back to the first two texts. One of them had the witnesses, perhaps had more oversight, community oversight, and the other one did it himself.
Oh, and so then the one that sort of runs rampant didn't have that community oversight piece. Huh, interesting. Okay, you want
two things. First of all, you pointed out that it actually uses the word golem when it's describing when Adam was created. And I'm just wonder if even beyond just saying that maybe as an unformed mass, it could also mean incomplete in the sense that maybe the golem is a being without autonomy because he's called golem before he gets his soul.
Before he gets his soul.
So maybe it's incomplete, not necessarily in the physical formation, but in the existential, maybe.
I like it. I like it a lot, especially as we're considering morality to be sort of like a key question in the golem. I like that. Like maybe morality is what's given to us with our souls. Yeah.
I'd like to know, one thing I'd like to note, and like we're just still at the beginning, is there's not one female in any of this.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Creating, and the golem is kind of like assumed to be male. So,
yeah. Male or genderless.
Or genderless. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I think that is a very important element of what we're looking at, that oftentimes when we think of Jewish folklore or Jewish folk practices, we think of the Judaism of women that was not written down or taken as seriously. And here we're looking at a folklore practice that comes out of men. And I want to sort of add in the piece of like, what is interesting here of these men doing the work of creating, when at this time they understood that the work of creating happened really only within women. Today we understand gender more expansively, and so we wouldn't say that quite as binary as that, but that this is like a man's imagination of what it is to give birth. Very fascinating. Okay. There's only 5 minutes left, so I'm actually going to skip our next text and end with the idea of a golem today, which today is actually January 2022. This is an excerpt from a sermon. It's actually, there's, the sermon was actually given on the high holidays, but this is, so Rabbi Josh Fixler has his own, he calls it his own golem museum. He's been a collector of golem figures his whole life. You can follow him on Instagram at golem_museum. In his home. There we go. The museum is in his home. But you can follow it on Instagram, and he posts like images of all of these collectibles, stories that go along with them. And he, I would say, in the modern Reform rabbinate, has done the most research on the golem today. And so this is from one of his Instagram posts, but it's citing a high holiday sermon that he gave in 2019, I believe, about what is it to consider a golem today. And I have got to say, he could have written this yesterday. It's very prescient and relevant to the world that we're in. And so these are his words. It's been a difficult weekend. While events at Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, ultimately ended in triumph and not tragedy, our hearts are still broken for the trauma that Rabbi Citron Walker and his congregants experienced. As we can tell, this was right after the events in Colleyville. As the scenes unfolded on our TV, we were grateful for the bravery of the rabbi and of all the members of law enforcement and local community who showed up to offer help and support. But we also asked a question we have asked too frequently in these past years. Do we today need a golem? Rabbi Yehuda Loew built his golem to defend the members of the Jewish community of Prague from people who wished to harm them. When the crisis had been averted, he took the golem to the old New Shoals attic, and turned it back into mud. Legend has it that this mud lies there to this day in case the golem should ever be needed again. But even a casual reader of Jewish history has to wonder, has there really never been a time since the 16th century where the need was great enough? At the 2019 High Holidays, lead curator of the Golem Museum, Rabbi Josh Fixler, asked this question. He wrote, "As I stood in the shadow of the Alt Nushul this past summer in Prague and looked up at the resting place of the golem, I wondered if he might be that cure. Might I feel less afraid if there had been a golem to stand guard in Charlottesville, in Pittsburgh, or Poway? The image of a powerful golem that could protect the Jews at this time of increased vulnerability is an alluring fantasy. But it is just that, a fantasy. Our threats are real, and our responses must be based in facts, not myths." Rabbi Fixler encourages us to be the golem we wish to see in the world, to stand for ourselves, but also to stand for others who are vulnerable, because anti-Semitism is never isolated hatred. Ultimately, Rabbi Fixler concluded, a mindless clay mask cannot save us. We must be the power we need. Where there is hatred, we must be love. Where there is fear, we must be hope. Where there is darkness, we must be light. Let the golem rest in his attic with his prayer books and his talitot. We've better uses for our words than bringing him back to life. And with that, we are actually at time. So I will leave you with his question of, do we need golem today? And his answer, which is no. And I'll also just give you a quick rundown of what the rest of your packets are, so that if you want to study ghost figures, you are welcome to on your own. Are the first text under ghosts and necromancy, which are very tied together. Necromancy, the idea of the magic of reviving the dead. Again, from Sanhedrin, from the Talmud, is a text which is going to give you the differences as the Talmudic rabbis understood between necromancy and sorcery. Then we have a text from Samuel, from the first book of Samuel, where King Saul, one of the great kings of our United Kingdom, goes and inquires of a woman in Endor who's often called the Witch of Endor, and inquires of, essentially asks her to do a seance to inquire of a ghost for his future. Then we have quite a few texts from the Talmud, which are going to show us different ways of, or different stories of communicating with ghosts or communicating with the dead. And it ends with two other different ghost-like figures, the Dybbuk and the Ibor, which are two different versions of ghosts that aren't quite ghosts as we understand them, just like souls floating around, but have a bit more possession to them. So that you can study on your own. Thank you for going on this strange golem journey with me tonight. It was very lovely to do this learning with you all. And I'll be here to ask questions if you want for a little bit.